Now let's take a look at animation in 3ds Max. We're going to start off by configuring our animation settings. Now in this scene, I have a little bit of animation here. And the first thing I want to show you is how to play back animation. So down here in the bottom right corner, we have a playback control so we can play our animation. We can also stop that to stop the animation. We can go previous frame, or we can go back to the start or the end. Now this here tells us the frame number, so if we want to, we can scroll that a frame at a time. And also notice how the time slider is also scrolling. So we can also step through the animation using this time slider, and we can go forward or back a frame using these arrows. Now if we want to configure this a little bit further, we can go to the time configuration window. So click here, and that brings up time configuration. So this will give us things such as the frame rate. So if we want NTSC or PAL frame rates, we can choose those. We can also do film, which is 24 frames a second, or we can do our own custom frames per second. Now we can also change how the time displays here on the timeline. Right now it is set to frames, which is the default, but we can change it to something such as SMPTE, and when I click on that, you'll see I'm getting time code on that timeline. Now I'm going to go ahead back into time configuration and set it to frames. Now down here we have the playback speed. Do we want to try and play back in real time? Do we want to play back only in the active viewport, which can save you a lot of speed? Do we want to loop the animation? And then what is the speed? Do we want to play back at one time frame rate or half or double speed? And then we can also change the length of the timeline. What's our start and end time? What's the total length of the animation? And what's the current time? So we can affect all of that on the timeline. So if I wanted to make this, say, 120 frames long, then you'll see that my timeline goes to 120 frames. If I want to start a little bit later, you can see how I can dial that in. So I'm going to go ahead and set that back to 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now if I want to, I can also set my timeline interactively. So if I hold down Control and Alt and left click, I can set the start time. Right click sets the end time. So if I want to, I could set that back to 100. Middle click sets the range. So if I have 100 frames, am I going from 1 to 100 or from 10 to 110? So as you can see, you can scroll through this timeline fairly easily. Now, if you have a very long animation, this can be a very handy way to zoom in on the timeline so you can actually see the frames. So these are some of the basics of how to set up your animation settings in 3ds Max. So go ahead and adjust your settings to your liking.